This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
Oftentimes, when we kind of reject reality, we push back against reality and fight it. Not only does that get in our way of actually understanding what's going on so that we can intervene more effectively, but it oftentimes then prolongs our suffering, leads to maybe even more suffering and more of the things that we're hoping might be able to stop in the first place.
That was Alissa Jerud on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive, and an upcoming book about misunderstanding.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hi, listeners. A quick reminder to stay tuned for my co-host post with Debbie, where we get even deeper into some parenting controversies. You won't want to miss it. Also, remember, you can sign up for Patreon in the show notes or on our website to support the podcast and have an ad-free listening experience. All right, let's get to today's interview. Alissa Jerud, PhD, is a mom of 2 kids, a licensed clinical psychologist, a clinical assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and author of Emotion Savvy Parenting, a shame-free guide to navigating emotional storms and deepening connection, which is what we're here to talk about today. She has a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Washington and completed her postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania's Center for the Treatment and Study of Anxiety. In her private practice, Dr. Jerud specializes in exposure-based treatments for anxiety-related disorders. Additionally, she specializes in dialectical behavior therapy skills training and particularly enjoys helping other parents learn research-backed strategies for accepting, regulating, and tolerating their emotions, as well as their children's. Dr. Jerud also trains other clinicians in exposure-based treatments and frequently gives workshops on anxiety, stress, mental health, parenting, and social support to companies large and small. Welcome to Psychologists Off the Clock, Alissa.
Oh, thank you so much, Emily. I'm so excited to be here.
So I want to start with a little soapbox of mine about parenting in general. So we're both in the parenting world, and there are just so many parenting styles, approaches, categories, a lot of them named after animals for some reason, that I worry that each singular one gets diluted by the many. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of kind of eye rolling at the idea of another type of parenting, right?
Yep.
So I want to start by making space for you to differentiate what you have labeled emotion savvy parenting. So what is it and what sets it apart?
Well, emotion savvy parenting, I think of as really being rooted in the evidence-based treatments that I provide in my clinical practice. So in my clinical work, as you noted, I specialize in exposure-based treatments and dialectical behavior therapy skills training. And at the heart of those treatments is the idea that we can feel strong, painful, unwanted emotions and still choose to show up in the world as the people we want to be. And so bringing that idea to parenting, I think we can, again, as parents, we're going to feel really strong, uncomfortable emotions at times, or sometimes often, all the time, it can seem. We can feel those ways and still choose to interact with our kids in a way that's skillful, effective, and also consistent. So that's really what emotion savvy parenting, as far as I'm concerned, is all about.
So what do you think makes it different from other parenting approaches?
So to differentiate it, I mean, I think there's so much overlap, first of all, between my approach and so many other approaches. Really, emotion-savvy parenting, though, in addition to having this background in the evidence-based treatments I provide, it's also informed by ideas from a type of parenting that's known as respectful parenting. And respectful parenting is really about allowing our kids to feel strong, painful, unwanted emotions themselves and not always trying to swoop in and fix those feelings for those kids, not retracting limits because we're afraid that then our kids are going to be upset and that's going to kind of ruin our kids somehow or our relationship with them. Mm-hmm. But instead of holding those firm limits while allowing our kids to feel however they feel, right? So instead of saying you get what you get and you can't be upset, right? It's like you get what you get and it's okay to be upset, essentially. Right. And so my approach really I'm trying to bring those ideas together. And I really find that respectful parenting aligns pretty beautifully with the science-backed treatments that I offer in my clinical work. And so I really try to merge them together in my book and when I'm working with parents as well.
I would say, just to elaborate on that, what I really appreciate also is that the focus is on us as the parent and what we can do for ourselves to manage our emotions and how we're interacting with our children and aligning with our values around parenting, rather than so much of the parenting guidance out there that is about how to change your kids.
Yes, I'm glad you said that because that actually is a big thing that I think about a lot, that really the only person we have full control over is ourselves. And so that is where the focus is for me as well. And the only other piece that I'll note, I do think kind of to what you're saying, a lot of what's out there focuses on our kids, either changing their behavior or allowing them to do whatever they want and feel however they feel. And I really think of my approach as being more about how can I help parents by helping them to manage those emotions, knowing that in doing so, I think we can also help kids too.
Exactly. It's the filtered down effects of when we're calmer, it helps our children. Yeah. And the whole situation is just a little easier to manage when there's an eruption. So you alluded to respectful parenting and something that we kind of chatted about before meeting today is really wanting to acknowledge for the listeners that you and I might have different ideas about gentle parenting. And regular listeners will know that I take issue with parts of it. But as we were talking, I really want to be clear that I have learned as I'm going through my own parenting journey, how much I realize I'm doing a lot of what gentle parenting prescribes. And there is quite an overlap with autonomy supportive parenting, what I, specialize in, especially around the idea of really honoring our children's experiences, trying to understand where they're coming from in a moment so that we can be more effective when we respond to them. And there's that empathy and kind of taking their perspective that are linchpins of autonomy supportive parenting. And they're also some of the main components of gentle parenting. So I just want to lay that groundwork because as we go through the conversation, there may be points where we may have a different take on something. But I think it's great because it can illustrate that this is a gray area and not the black and white that seems to be everywhere today. And all of the thinking in media and influencers and social media is such a more absolutist take on every part of our lives, and it's just not reality. So we're here for the gray area.
Yep. I'm so glad you noted that, because I think in general, gentle parenting is this pretty amorphous construct. And there are so many different approaches to parenting that, you could say fall under that larger umbrella of gentle parenting. And my guess is that many of the things you don't like about gentle parenting are things that I also kind of am not a huge fan of when it is done in certain ways.
Right.
And so I'm glad you noted that.
So we'll see where we come together. And it's always fun to have a little debate if that comes up, right?
Yeah.
So along those lines, how have gentle parenting ideas informed your emotion-savvy parenting approach?
Yeah. Well, really, again, I think it's the ideas from gentle parenting that I try to bring into my parenting are that we can allow our kids to feel strong, uncomfortable emotions, even when their feelings or thoughts that they're expressing, their behaviors maybe are prompting some uncomfortable emotions in us.
Yeah.
So allowing those to be there, not trying to change or fix what's going on for our kids, and then still choosing to show up as the parents we want to be, acting in a way that's consistent with our values. And so that's really the piece of gentle parenting that I appreciate. Mm-hmm. And I guess the other piece that I'll note there is what I also like about gentle parenting is that, again, the focus, as you noted earlier, oftentimes is on us as parents, as opposed to trying to change our kids. Because I find, whether it's with my friends, my family, or people I see in my clinical practice, or even in my own life, that oftentimes those attempts to control our kids, to get our kids to change, oftentimes backfire and leave us feeling more out of control, and also kind of reinforce that faulty belief that we can't tolerate those uncomfortable emotions unless we do something to try to change the circumstances so that we don't have to feel that way.
It's such an important point. And I talk about that a lot as well, around the importance of our children can only build their distress tolerance skills if we have ours.
Yep.
And I hear from parents all the time how difficult it is to watch their child struggle and suffer. Mm-hmm. And what we see happening, as I'm sure you would agree, is parents swooping in to fix for their kids in ways big and small.
Mm-hmm.
And especially as our kids age and get older, and it keeps happening, there's so many negative effects on our children of not building their own confidence in their emotional coping and ability to handle stress in their lives.
Yeah. And when we swoop in, we send that message that those emotions aren't okay, right? Yep. That they can't tolerate them. So we're kind of, communicating that to them inadvertently. Obviously, we're never trying to do that.
It's a good thing to put in our consciousness.
Yeah.
Is that what message is this sending that I'm not intending to send around big emotions? So I would love to then dive into acceptance. Mm-hmm. It's something that you spend a lot of time on in your book. I think it's a really important concept in parenting and how we can apply this. So acceptance is an idea I actually get into with Deborah Reber in a previous interview about parenting differently wired kids. And I think it's so central, not only to effective parenting, but to parent and child well-being. So how would you describe the role of acceptance in parenting?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think it's kind of really key. It's so much of our ability to move through the world in general effectively, I think, and especially through our journeys as parents really hinges on our ability to accept. First, I should note what acceptance is, maybe, because oftentimes people think acceptance is about approving or liking of something. And that's not what acceptance is. Acceptance is really about moving through the world with our eyes wide open, noticing what is in front of us exactly as it is, just the facts, not our thoughts or interpretations about those facts, and then choosing to proceed skillfully. And so in parenting, so much of what we try to do, I think, as parents is, we have big hopes and dreams for our kids, and we want them to be the type of people we want them to be. Usually we want them to be kind, empathic. And so oftentimes when we see those behaviors in our kids that really aren't quite what we would like, they're not acting in ways that we hope they would act, it can lead us as parents to want to try to push back against that, to want to try to change our kids. And the thing with that is that our kids, their brains are still developing and will be all throughout adolescence and even through young adulthood. And so recognizing that that's part of development. Our kids are going to behave in ways that look inappropriate, but that are actually very much quite developmentally appropriate, and accepting that. So accepting those behaviors that may be kind of, again, like kids screeching at the dinner table or, even shouting hurtful words, even sometimes trying to hit their sibling, like accepting those behaviors, not necessarily trying to not do anything to try to stop those behaviors, but accepting those as opposed to this can't be happening. This is wrong. We need to, immediately change this behavior. And the reason for that is that oftentimes when we kind of reject reality, we push back against reality and fight it. Not only does that get in our way of actually understanding what's going on so that we can intervene more effectively, but it oftentimes then prolongs our suffering, leads to maybe even more suffering and more of the things that we're hoping might be able to stop in the first place.
Well, it's a big idea to talk about in a nutshell. But I think one of the keys is what you bring up is what I would call resistance. So when we're in resistance mode and pushing back and trying to change reality, it leads to more suffering and more distress. So just to elaborate, if a child is engaging in a problematic behavior, let's say they're hitting their sibling, what does that acceptance look like versus resistance?
Yeah, so I think one, it's accepting that they have the urge to hit their sibling, as opposed to like, that's not an okay thing, right? I mean, we probably all have urges to hit somebody at times, even if we don't act on those. So I think it's accepting the urge, accepting the emotions that are below that are like bringing on that urge, as well as the thoughts that might be there that our kids are having, that they hate their sibling in that moment, that it's not fair what their sibling did, while also recognizing, because I don't think we have to accept unsafe or destructive behaviors themselves. So for me, it's about recognizing I can't allow that to continue. And so we can talk about kind of like the intervention strategy there. Usually it would be ideally kind of getting in there to lovingly block the next hit so that it can't continue. And then later circling back to what happened there, how maybe might the kid been able to have navigated that differently. But really just accepting that that's going to happen from time to time. Those strong unwanted emotions are going to get the better of our kids. That happens to all of us as humans. And again, then proceeding from there.
So I think it's also really working on our own curiosity around what is happening for our child in that moment that led to the problem behavior, rather than focusing only on the problem behavior to stop it.
Yep. And acceptance, I think of it, Marsha Linehan talks about it in this way, that it's the catalyst of change, that we can't go ahead and change any behavior unless we first understand that behavior. Why is that behavior happening in the first place? And so, yes, it is, that curiosity is really key there.
So let's get into the details of your framework for becoming more emotionally adept parents. So you present 2 categories that influence our emotions, primary and secondary ingredients. So could you explain these for the listeners?
Yeah, sure. So it might kind of sound silly, but I like to think of our emotions as being similar to a batch of cookies. So if you think about a batch of cookies, oftentimes we have 2 sets of ingredients that make up cookies, right? You've got your wet ingredients and your dry ingredients. You mix them together and voila, you have a delicious, beautiful cookie. Let's say it's a chocolate chip cookie. You can see the chocolate chips, but otherwise you can't see all of the ingredients that make up that cookie. And similarly, our emotions, oftentimes it's like we feel them, but we don't really understand what it is that makes them up, because those ingredients aren't always so noticeable or apparent to us. But really, if you think about it, and we've got science to back this up, there are these kind of primary and secondary ingredients that make up our emotions, or at least that's how I like to think of them. So the primary ingredients are those things that we need in order for an emotion to fire in the first place. So first of all, there has to be some kind of prompting event, right? Your kid has to do something. They try to hit their sibling, or they make a giant mess in the home. They refuse to put on their shoes when they're getting out the door. Your kid has to do something there, or something else happens in the environment. Could even be something within you. You've got a bellyache, a headache in that moment, and that's kind of a prompting event for you. But something has to happen. Then we need to have certain thoughts or interpretations about what that is, right? So if it's your kid hitting, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're doing that. They're too old to be doing this.
Right.
Right. Or it might be, now my day is going to be ruined because I've got this horrible headache and I can't stand anything that's not just right in the environment. But some kind of thought about that prompting event. And there are usually vulnerability factors that render us more likely to make certain thoughts or interpretations about those prompting events. And those could be things that we experienced in like the distant past when we were kids. So maybe as kids, if we hit our siblings, oh my goodness, right? We were punished and, yelled at pretty harshly. So it could be something like that. It could be having a pre-existing, anxiety disorder or depression that may be on board and that's been there for quite some time. So something that's been present for a while or happened a long time ago. And then we also have more what we call like proximal vulnerability factors, things that happen in the recent kind of few moments or few even day that lead us more vulnerable to making certain interpretations. So maybe I'm just like slammed at work and I'm really stressed about that. Maybe I just got into an argument with my partner, or I'm worried about a sibling who's going through a hard time, right? There may be just things going on that make me more likely to have kind of some certain interpretations about that prompting event. And depending on the interpretations that I do have, that's going to determine whether or not an emotion fires. So in cognitive behavioral therapy, for instance, we give that example of, if what you might think if a friend walked by and didn't say hi. And you may think like, they must be really mad at me. And then that's going to lead you to feel angry at that friend or confused. Versus you may have the thought like, they probably just didn't see me and they were in their own world and that's why they didn't say hi, right? So again, the idea that our thoughts are going to greatly influence the emotion that fires. So those are the primary ingredients that are going to set off an emotion.
A modern day example I just want to put out there is texting.
Oh, yeah.
When you get a text that just says, okay, and then depending on where you are in your state of mind and how you're feeling, you can have a completely different story about that tiny little
that
text.
means. Yep, for sure. It happens to all of us. Yes. So those are the primary ingredients. We need those in order for an emotion to fire. And I'll just also note that, right, like if you aren't even aware of a prompting event, you're not going to have that emotion. If your kid says something hurtful to you, but you don't hear them,
right,
no emotion's going to fire, right? Yeah. So those are the primary ingredients. The secondary ingredients are all what happens from there once that emotion is kind of in full swing. So when that emotion fires, there are going to be chemical changes that happen in our body, as well as physical sensations that we're going to have, right? So, our adrenaline is pumping at that point in time, and we're going to probably feel like our heart is racing. Maybe if we're feeling, let's say, anger, our heart may be racing. We may be feeling hot and sweaty. Our muscles may get tense. We're going to feel some strong physical sensations. We're also probably going to notice some like urges to act in some ways. So maybe it's that I've got an urge to yell, to shout, to punish, to try to control. And there are probably going to be some changes in my like bodily expressions as well, and my facial expressions, my voice tone. So if I'm angry, again, maybe I'm going to, like clench my fists. I'm going to furrow my brows. I might speak in a harsher tone, all of those things. In addition to that, I'm going to probably around this point notice that I'm feeling some kind of emotion. I may not even be able to name it, that it's anger, but I know something's there. And then even when that anger starts to dissipate, there are going to be some after effects of that anger. So maybe I've kind of like cooled off, but then like I might be more likely to view my kids' next actions in that same angry light. That previous emotion of anger almost might make me more vulnerable to feeling anger a few moments later.
Right. I'm sure every parent listening can relate to this. So let's talk about what to do, which is the bulk of your book. Yeah. So what are some strategies for altering? Let's start with the primary ingredients.
Yeah. Well, I will just note, because I think it can sound kind of overwhelming to think of like all these ingredients that make up our emotions. I actually think of it as being this really kind of comforting thing to think about, because with all these different ingredients that make up emotion, that means there are all these different points for intervention, different ways that we can go about trying to change that emotion. And so in my book, I talk about like the ART tools, which are science-backed strategies for regulating our emotions and or relating more skillfully to our emotions. So there's acceptance, which we talked about. Then there are the skills for regulating emotions, which are really about how can we change those primary ingredients. And then there are skills for tolerating unwanted emotions, which are, again, about how can we change those secondary ingredients. So the skills for regulating our emotions are really first, sometimes we need to change the prompting event, right? So maybe it's that your kids are really screaming loudly and it's like you're sensitive to noise, so you pop in some earplugs while they're kind of screaming in the room. Maybe it's that you decide we're going to go outside where the acoustics are different and it's not as loud or painful to the ears. So maybe you're changing something about what's happening so that that prompting event is no longer bringing on such an uncomfortable emotion in you. We could also, though, go after the thoughts. And I'll know, I think that there are limits there, right? Sometimes the thoughts are going to be there. You're going to have the thought that your kid is just being so annoying. Yeah. And that thought's going to be there. And so sometimes it's about just like letting that thought be there.
And that's okay. Let's just say.
That's okay. We all have those thoughts, right?
You can let those thoughts. Parent.
No, not at all. I don't think I've met a parent yet who doesn't have those kinds of thoughts about their kids from time to time. So when those thoughts are there and they're not budging, you aren't changing them, can we let them almost like buzz around us like they're a fly? Let them be there, but not have to necessarily latch onto them or follow them. Just let them show up as they do, and we can almost notice them. Yep, I see you. You're still there. So sometimes we may take that approach. Other times we might be able to like remind ourselves, no, they're not trying to be a jerk. They're just like, they're clearly struggling right now and need some support. So maybe we can reframe that thought, right? Just noticing that that thought might not be serving you all that well. It's probably not leaving you feeling all that good, leaving you to act in ways that are kind of how you want to act with your kids. So what might be an alternative, maybe more realistic, more adaptive, more useful way of thinking in that moment? And the final set of skills are certainly by no means rocket science, but it's about like noticing that there are oftentimes things that we can do to reduce our vulnerability factors. So I talk about the importance of resting, fueling, and moving our bodies. That oftentimes, I don't know about you, but for me, when I'm getting angry or annoyed oftentimes at my kids, it's because I'm either really lacking in sleep, or maybe I haven't had a chance to properly fuel my body with food, nourishing food. Or I've just been like sitting all day in session after session, and I just need to get out and move for a little bit. Yeah. So just recognizing that oftentimes it doesn't take all that much to change one of those things, do something to care for our bodies, and that can actually make it a lot easier to regulate our emotions.
Absolutely. And I think every parent could also relate to being sleep deprived and how that lowers our resources.
Why choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can I make my site softer?
Can I make my site firmer?
Can we sleep cooler?
Sleep Number does that. Cools up to 8 times faster and lets you choose your ideal comfort on either side. Your Sleep Number setting. It's the Sleep Number biggest sale of the year. All beds on sale, up to 50% off the limited edition smart bed, plus free home delivery with the purchase of any smart bed. Ends Monday. All Sleep Number smart beds offer temperature solutions for your best sleep. Check it out at a Sleep Number store or sleepnumber.com today.
So I want you to get into a couple of specific things that I really liked. I think that would be helpful for the listeners. And we do have a lot of mental health therapists and professionals in our audience, but not everyone. Mm-hmm. So some people may be more familiar with this than others, but could you go through the CARE model?
Yeah. So the CARE skills are some of the distress tolerance skills, or are a set of skills that fall under that larger umbrella. And really, they are actually skills that I adapted from dialectical behavior therapy. So for those of your listeners who are therapists or are familiar with DBT, you may recognize these as the TIP skills. And I transformed them to the CARE skills just because I've always found that TIP acronym to be a little clunky and hard to remember, even though they're like the most fabulous set of skills, in my opinion. And so the CARE skills are really about the idea that when we're feeling really strong, painful emotions, we need to take good care to make sure that those emotions aren't hijacking us and getting the better of us. And so the skills stand for cool with ice, activate your body, relax your muscles, and exhale slowly. And these are skills that we can use to rapidly kind of reduce the physiological arousal that we may be feeling or experiencing when we're having an intense, unwanted emotion. So if you think about those secondary ingredients again, these are targeting the chemical changes that occur in our body as well as the physical changes that occur in our body or the physical sensations that may be there. I will just note that these skills can really rapidly reduce people's heart rates. And so if any of your listeners have a heart condition or some other kind of medical condition that affects their heart, it's worth checking. They should probably check with their doctor before trying out these skills because it may not be safe for them to use them. But really, these skills are intended to work as effectively, as quickly as, some illicit substances or alcohol, things that maybe don't always help in the long term for us. They really work as effectively as those, as quickly as those, without any of the harmful side effects. And so the first one, cool with ice, is really based on the idea that we're wired, evolutionarily wired, to have our heart rate slow down. So our hearts stop pumping blood to our extremities in order to conserve energy and heat our core. And so what we can do, one way we can go ahead and calm our bodies, reduce that heart rate that may feel like it's, kind of thumping wildly, is simply to either take a cold ice pack and cover it, put it over our eyes so that it's on our cheekbones and over our temples, put it there for about 30 seconds. Or, and this can get a little messy, but if you're willing, you can get a large bowl of very cold water, maybe add a few ice cubes and dunk your head in it for about 30 seconds. And this can actually elicit what is known as the dive reflex, which again is what happens when we're in that very cold water. So it can really rapidly reduce heart rates. And I've seen heart rates plummet by about 50% or more within 30 seconds, which is pretty remarkable. So it's a way we can quickly kind of take the edge off of those emotions when we can't go ahead and maybe we can't change that anger altogether. That anger is still going to be there, but can I bring it down a smidge so that then I can use some other skills and proceed a little more skillfully?
Right. It's very hard to work on thoughts when you're that aroused.
Yeah.
And
good luck. There's no way that's going to happen. Yeah. And that one of the reasons I especially love the cool with ice one is because it really doesn't require any brain power to use that other than to say, I'm going to get the ice pack or I'm going to dunk my head in water. Then other ones, similarly, activate your body is another one where we just get out and get some intense aerobic exercise for 20 or 30 minutes. And that, what happens is our heart rates then speed up as we're doing that. But then afterward, there's this natural heart rate recovery period that happens where our heart rates then get a chance to kind of naturally decline. And we can sense that shift of our heart rate slowing down after intense exercise. Also, obviously, that intense exercise releases those feel-good chemicals, those endorphins that might help to boost our mood as well. So that's activate your body. Relax your muscles is another skill we can use. So I will say it is a little more effortful, but it's about can we tense and then release those muscles in order to bring about a greater sense of relaxation in our muscles than we otherwise might feel if we're just like sitting there kind of like clenching our, our shoulders and our fists in a moment of anger or some other unwanted emotion. And what I'll just note there is that if I were to tell you to go ahead and relax your muscles right now, chances are you wouldn't feel all that much different. But if we first tense those muscles and then release them, it's kind of like a pendulum. If we, pull it back and then release it, it's going to swing further than if we just try to hit it at rest. Same idea with our muscles. So you can go ahead and quickly tense either all of your muscles at once or individual muscle groups for 3 or 4 seconds, and then release those for 5 or more seconds. And just notice the difference in your body. Chances are your body will feel more relaxed afterward. And then the final one, exhale slowly, is really, based on the idea that how we breathe really does impact how we feel. And we all know this because when we're upset or our kids are upset, oftentimes we say things like, take a deep breath. Right. But it turns out that when we take that deep breath, oftentimes we take a really big breath in, but our heart rates actually speed up when we inhale and slow down when we exhale. And so one way that we can kind of calm our bodies a little bit is to take a normal breath in. And for 3 or 4 seconds, and then a really slow, long breath out for 5 or 7 seconds. And then we can even slow down that breathing a little bit more by holding our breath for another 3 or 4 seconds before taking that next breath in. And again, that's just another way to really quickly calm our heart rates.
So I want to say one thing about the deep breath that I love is that I have worked with so many families and in my own family where kids really watch that and it means more than when you say to them, take a deep breath, if they have seen you taking deep breaths.
Yeah, for sure.
And I've seen kids remind their parents,
Yep.
take a deep breath, Mom.
Yep. Yeah. That modeling. And I think that's part of the reason why I really like many of the ideas from gentle parenting, because I do think there's that importance in modeling. If we can show our kids that, we can still show up as the people we want to be, even when there's, all sorts of chaos brewing around us and within us, well, then we're modeling that for our kids to hopefully one day follow as well. Not necessarily anytime soon, but hopefully
and
one
these
day.
Physical acts of care for our body is something they can see.
Yeah.
Whereas if we're just sort of doing the mental reframing of thoughts, that's not visible and observable. But
right.
I like this about if I grab an ice pack and put it on me, my kid can see me do that.
Yep.
And then they might ask for an ice pack at some point, right?
Yep. Exactly.
So one thing I really want to touch on is how core parenting beliefs may make our lives harder. So for example, a common one that I hear and that you cite is that kids should obey their parents and toe the line at all times. Yeah. So I've heard many modern parents say, I never could have acted like that. Yeah. And in my mind, I think, well, then your child's better off that they can. It's actually a good thing. But I think it's a really hard traditional belief in parenting to let go of for many, many parents. So how do you see this becoming problematic? This idea of, well, they should just listen and they should do what we ask them to do.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes back to that acceptance piece, because it's not really rooted in acceptance. It's kind of like, again, I don't think it's ever realistic to expect our kids are going to obey the rules at all times, and they're never going to do anything that's going to prompt an unwanted emotion in us, right? That's just not going to happen. I don't think even if we weren't allowed to do lots of things as kids, I'm sure we weren't angels. We were doing things that were not ideal in our parents' eyes, and recognizing that our attempts to quash that, to try to insist that our kids do better at all times, and to try to control their behavior so that they are kind of more adhering to whatever it is that we're saying, that's going to leave us oftentimes feeling more out of control, right? Because we're going to be expecting something that isn't actually happening. It's not mapping onto our reality. That's going to add to our suffering and our pain. And again, strengthen that belief that we can't tolerate it. We can't, show up in an effective, skillful way. We can't be happy parents unless our kids obey us at all times. And so I think that's just a recipe for a lot of frustration for parents. And also I'll just note some disconnect between parents and kids, because then our kids feel as though, again, different kids may feel differently, but that we don't really understand them. We don't accept them as is, which doesn't feel good for them either.
Yeah, that's my main concern with it, is that there's this pattern that will develop where they don't feel like they can express how they're feeling, who they are. I mean, it can get really deep that they can't show up how they feel authentically to show up. And then there is that disconnect over time. And what I see, and the reason I joke that, well, I think it's a good thing that your kid is acting, having a complete meltdown, is that the danger is the internalization of emotions over time, right? And so I think as much as we sort of wax nostalgic about the 80s parenting being so much less helicoptery, I think there was also not a lot of room for kids to really express themselves. And the pendulum is swinging towards more of that openness to our children's entire emotional experience. And that is something really positive that I think gentle parenting philosophy has brought into the world. It's something that autonomy supportive parenting backs up as well. But I think it's, for everyone's emotional health, really critical that there's that ability to express emotions. And so obeying every rule is all about the adults, and it has nothing to do with the children. And I think that's a really important mindset shift.
Yeah. And I will tell you, I have worked with so many people who have some kind of an anxiety disorder. They have OCD. And I never am purposely diving into people's childhoods when doing exposure-based treatments. And it often just comes up that you know what? I developed this way of shutting down emotions quickly because it was safer in my home. It wasn't okay to feel or express these ways. It wasn't okay to make mistakes. And so now I need to do everything perfectly so that I don't get, in trouble, because that's essentially what I've learned.
Or punished.
Punished. Exactly. Yep. And so, I fully agree that it is in the kids' best interest. I also, though, coming back to, why I wrote the book in large part is I think it's in our best interest to accept reality as opposed to always be trying to push against it.
So I want to make sure we have time to talk about responding to our kids' emotional storms. So this kind of ties into they're not always going to obey the rules. And so this isn't as much about our emotional storms, because we may be feeling great. We may be having a really good day. We're calm. We're happy. We're in a good space emotionally. That does not mean our children are in the same space. So walk us through your suggestions for what to do in these moments of emotional storms.
Yeah, it really comes down to accepting those storms in those moments. Like almost, I liken trying to change our kids' emotions as being akin to trying to hold up buckets in a rainstorm in order to prevent the ground from getting wet. And sure, we may be able to stop the rain from falling on this very little part of the land that we're covering with buckets, but eventually, if that rain is coming down heavily, it's going to spill over the buckets and drench everything around it. And I think the same idea with our kids, maybe we could distract our kids out of their tears for a moment. We could offer them a cookie or, tell them it's going to be okay. And maybe that quiets things down for a moment, but it's not that emotion just goes away. That emotion is in there and is eventually going to get kind of released in some other way that we're going to probably find every bit as uncomfortable or possibly that we might see as problematic or concerning. And so rather than fight that emotion, I think we're so much better off just kind of welcoming those feelings, almost, just allowing that feeling to be there in full without trying to change it in any way. Wow, you're so upset right now that your brother did that, or, oh my goodness, that sounds really, sounds like you're feeling really hurt about what your friend said, and just allowing that emotion to be there in full.
So one thing I do want to acknowledge is those parents who are parenting neurodivergent kids who will have more intense and frequent emotional dysregulation. It's part of the makeup of neurodivergence in most cases. So in those cases, I will say that I have learned both very hands-on and working with so many families that they actually don't respond as well to the explicit validation because it's almost like staying stuck in it.
Yeah. And even my son, for instance, my kids, they're not neurodivergent. And yet I've heard from my son, he's like, stop telling me that it's okay to feel that way, or that he's like, I just don't want that. And so I think it's about really tuning into the kid in front of you and providing what is helpful for them. And I think we can convey acceptance of an emotion, welcoming of that emotion, even if we're silent, even if we're continuing to cook dinner, or, we're on the phone with somebody while our kid is wailing in the background. We can do that and still allow what's happening to be there. So, nodding our head kind of empathically, maybe if that feels good, if our kid likes touch, putting our arm around our kid, not to try to get rid of the feeling, but just to say, hey, I'm here. I'm willing to wade in this with you, to sit alongside you. Not that I'm going to get swept up by the emotion myself, but I can be with you in this moment. I don't have to get this to change or stop. I also don't have to leave because it's too overwhelming or stressful for me to be with you here.
That's a great example. One thing that I share in my book, and I think I've talked about before, but I remember when my son was 4 and we were on a playground, their school playground on a weekend, and he was wanting to play gaga ball with a group of older kids. And I knew this is not going to go well, right? So he gets tagged out and he runs to another part of the asphalt and just crouches down and is crying and screaming. And I'm a few yards away talking to some other parents, and I don't rush over because I know that doesn't help. And one of the other parents said, I can't believe you're not going over there. It's better, trust me. And he did. He let it all out. And then he stood back up and ran right back to the game. So he, just needed to get out the frustration. And then he collected himself and was able to rejoin and rebound from the emotion.
and you responded to the kid in front of you, right? You knew what it was that he needed. And I think so much of parenting is like that can trip us up sometimes is what are other parents thinking of us? And it sounds like, yeah, but you were able to, maybe if I had to guess, you probably knew that those judgments might be there and not give in to the urges then to jump in there just because other parents might be judging.
I think that's part of the thought reframing can be like, am I having this emotion because we're in public and I'm worried about how other people are judging my parenting? Like, would I react differently if we were at home?
Yep. And ideally, we can accept, maybe other people may be judging me, and I'm still going to react how I would if nobody were watching, ideally.
So a couple of things I wanted to pull out from your suggestions around dealing with our children's emotional storms is the futility of trying to reason with our children in the middle of meltdown. So what would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, coming back to what we talked about with the care skills, right? That part of the reason those are there is because we can't use those more effortful strategies. We can't access like the part of our brains, the prefrontal cortex that we need to in order to change those unhelpful thoughts when emotions are really, really hot and intense. And same for our kids. Like our kids are not going to be able to reason with us to logic their way through a given emotion when they are, feeling it really in full. And so I would say we're so much better off waiting until that storm has passed, right? That emotion is no longer so intense. Ideally, it's like kind of fully subsided. Maybe it's the next day that we circle back and have a conversation about what happened and what, if anything, they might be able to do differently rather than go ahead and try to target those thoughts right there and then. So for instance, my kids oftentimes say things like, I hate him or so-and-so. And in that moment, instead of trying to change that, no, you don't hate him. I'm just, wow, you're really mad at him, right?
Yeah.
You're thinking you hate him, right? That sort of thing. Or I don't even say that. I just kind of like let that be there, that in that moment, they hate them.
So you don't over-interpret.
No.
Right? I think that's the key, is not imposing. Yeah.
Yes.
That this is truth. This is not truth. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a thought and a feeling for them. Right.
Yeah.
One thing you mentioned is the importance of holding firm limits. And I loved that you did this because this is what I was thinking as I was reading it. There are times it's okay to drop those limits.
Yep.
So say more about that because I think that's really helpful for parents.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes we set limits kind of reflexively. It's like, I don't want to mess right now in my house. And so I'm just like, nope, you can't bake right now. When like, maybe I realize afterward, like, would it be so terrible if there was flour on the ground for a little bit today? Like, I probably could deal with that. Yeah. And so maybe I decided, okay, you know what, so be it. Or I think to myself, you know what, you were in the pool earlier today, and in theory, kind of like some of the sweat that was in grime that was on you got a little rinsed off. So like maybe you don't have to take that shower that a minute ago I was telling myself you needed to take. And so I think sometimes we may make those conscious choices. Ideally, though, we're better off when that decision is made from a place of just recognizing that maybe that limit we set wasn't really necessary, or helpful for us and our kid in that moment. And we realize that maybe it was actually like driven more by an emotion or again, a reflexive response. But ideally, we're not making the decision to abandon a given limit in order to get rid of an uncomfortable feeling in us or in our kid.
Right. It's not to avoid the negative experience. Right. It's a more thoughtful, is this really necessary? Right now? Like, is it worth what's happening?
Right.
And I mean, I'll just say it's important to remember what's happening with the executive functioning in those emotional meltdowns, because as you were saying, the prefrontal cortex isn't firing. It cannot work when the emotional centers are firing so rapidly. Yeah. And so if the limit requires planning, organization, decision-making, it's just going to add fuel to the fire and make everything that much worse. So if it's like picking out an outfit, for example, you're like, no, we had an agreement that you would do this every morning, but they're in a complete spin out, then they just can't. And I think it's recognizing that it's okay.
Right. And maybe getting in there and helping them out.
Doing it with them. That's one thing that, yes, I think is really helpful is it's not giving in. So I think parents worry, well, I can't give in because then they learn they don't have to do X, Y, and Z. But if they're really dysregulated and struggling, it's okay to do with. right? Kind of hold their hand through it.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
To get in there and lovingly help them put on those shoes or whatever they may need to do in that moment that they're struggling to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So one quote I wanted to make sure to highlight because I loved it. And I think actually there are places where gentle parenting influencers give an opposite message. So I want to pull it out. And that is, our kids' behaviors aren't really the best indicator of how we're doing as parents.
Yeah.
And if we can release that connection, I think that helps us stay calmer.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But I think so often like our barometer for success, is either based on are kids happy at all times? Are they complying at all times? And that's just not the case. That doesn't mean, what they're doing or not doing isn't a reflection always on us as parents. And I think so often in general, like even whether we're feeling strong, uncomfortable emotions, we can feel those uncomfortable emotions. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're failing as parents.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I am so glad you brought that up. I think that self-compassion piece in parenting is a really big part of the emotional regulation.
Yeah.
Okay. So a question I get at just about every speaking event I do about autonomy supportive parenting is what to do when the other parent or another key caregiver is on a completely different page.
Yeah.
So for example, what I hear a lot is one parent is really interested in approaches that support their child's emotional expression, autonomy, agency, but the other parent sees all of that as a threat to maintaining authority in the family.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts on how to manage this potential clash, which in itself likely causes heightened distress in parents?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's rare that parents probably see completely eye to eye when it comes to parenting. And in some ways, I think that's actually a gift that we give to our children, that they, those kids who do have two parents, that they learn, different things from each parent. And they get to practice being in a relationship with different kinds of people. So I don't think that's entirely a bad thing. And it can be really stressful for us as parents to navigate when our partner isn't on the same page. And I think one thing to note is that we're all doing the best we can as parents with the tools that we have, with like the perspectives that we currently have. And so I think, first of all, just as like I encourage giving our kids some grace and recognizing that they will do better if and when they're able to, I think we can do the same for our partners. That like, maybe right now for them, compliance and, not feeling strong emotions, that's what they see as being most important. And so, of course, then it makes perfect sense why they might choose to parent in certain ways. And how can we accept that right now, right? Accept exactly where they are, maybe even try to really understand where they are, and then engage in some thoughtful conversations with them around that might potentially shift where they're coming from over time. Probably not overnight, but maybe over time. And then maybe slowly there might be some change. And so sometimes I recommend when I'm working with a parent whose partner parents differently, maybe eventually when the other partner starts to see that there might be a different way to parent, maybe then that other partner working with a therapist as well down the road to try to be able to better manage their own emotions so that those emotions aren't always calling the shots in their parenting, if they're willing, if that's something they're on board with.
Well, and what I've learned in talking to parents is that it's coming from a place of love around this is how to be a good parent.
Yeah.
Is to have expectations for high standards of behavior, for example.
Right.
Like this is me being a good parent. So it can be understanding that that's the perspective while also allowing some space maybe for them to see how there's downsides to that expectation and that belief that that part is good parenting. Because if it's resulting in a lot of conflict, for example, and a breakdown. So what I'll also hear is, well, like my kids aren't as close to their father, for example, or they feel like they can't talk to him the same way. I think it's worth looking at, well, if that other parent is motivated for a closer relationship, maybe that's the in to make change.
For sure.
Yeah. So along these lines, and I think we're sort of alluding to authoritarian parenting styles, which is more traditional. One thing I want us to have time for before we wrap up is really the idea of punishment versus discipline. And so specifically, what I see happening, and this ties right into emotions, is that a child does something. Maybe it's impulsive, right? And they immediately regret it. Let's say they threw a remote and broke a TV, like something really bad happened, and they weren't intending to cause the damage, but they had a moment of rage, right? And then they just crumble in shame, embarrassment, guilt, right? So in my view, that is the consequence. They feel terrible. Now, there could be more to it, like they help replace the TV, right? Sure. However, to come down on them, which again, I think parents think that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to teach them they can't break a TV. Right? So that's an example. But what do you have to say? To elaborate
oh my
on
gosh. I fully agree with that, that natural consequence of feeling terrible, right, is so there. There have been a few times where we have a joke in my family that I break and my husband fixes. Like I just somehow seem to break lots of things, whether it's a Vitamix, a flat tire, whatever it is, all these things that are so annoying. And most of the time, my husband's pretty gracious about it and doesn't give me a hard time. But every now and then he's like, well, if you'd only done it this way, like, you really should have done that. And I'm just like, do you think I don't know that already? Yeah. Like, I feel pretty terrible about just what just happened. And so I think in those moments with our kids where our kids do something, maybe even intentionally in a moment, like you said, they felt that strong impulse and they did it and it caused some harm. They know, right, that it wasn't the right thing to do. They feel terrible about it. We don't need to layer on that additional level of shame and blame, punishment that's probably going to leave them feeling more disconnected from us, worse about themselves.
Yes.
And that might lead them to shut down the road and not be willing to share with us when something doesn't go well for them, when they do make mistakes. I want my kids to know it's okay to make mistakes and I'm going to be there to support them and still love them even when that happens. I'll just note, my son actually must have stepped on something and got a little blood blister in his foot. And so we went to the podiatrist and podiatrist kind of got it out and it was fine. And he actually told us, it's really good that you told your mom, because when I was a kid, I actually had something similar happen on my hand. And I was so scared to tell my parents because I was worried that I was going to get punished. And so I didn't and never got treated. And now I still have this issue on my hand because of it. And I was like, yes, that is exactly why I don't want to shame my kids in these moments when they do mess up.
That's such a story full of symbolism. It's like a lifetime scar left from that fear of punishment. And I do just want to say, of course, boundaries and limits and rules and consequences are important. It's just really calibrating, I think, to the moment and to the child.
Yeah. And I also just want to note here that, again, we are humans, and we're going to sometimes get upset about something that our kids do, right? We're going to kind of lash out in a moment, speak to them in an angry way. I want to make space for that as parents, for us to mess up too. And just like we don't have to shame our kids when they do so, I don't think we have to come down so hard on ourselves. And of course, we do still at times, but the more we can, like you said, be compassionate toward ourselves in those moments and recognize this is so hard, this parenting job that we've got. It's so beautiful and amazing. And just oh my goodness, there's no way we're going to do it perfectly at all times. And we can learn from those mistakes, repair with our kids, and aim to do better down the road, knowing that we're never going to get it perfect at all times.
And we know that repair is really good for relationship building.
Yeah.
So I think that's the other part of this, is the opportunities that come from disruption, right?
Yeah.
It's not about never having disruption between parent and child. Yeah. First of all, that's completely impossible and unrealistic, right? But second of all, there is opportunity there to build the closeness. It's really what we do with the disruption.
Yeah, exactly. And when we model that ability to repair, then our kids are able to do it themselves down the road too. Yeah.
Well, Alissa, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Is there anything we didn't talk about today that you wanted to make sure we cover?
Oh, you've asked so many great questions. So I'm not thinking of anything at the moment other than, again, I just want to really stress that, like, I had a friend of mine, tell me that they were really excited to read my book, even though they knew they'd probably feel pretty terrible about themselves as they were reading it, because of all the ways that they, maybe don't show up and that I'm suggesting. And I said to her, I was like, oh my goodness, that is the last thing I want anybody to feel when reading my book. Again, like I said, we're all doing the best that we can with the tools that we have. We all love our kids immensely. And so sometimes I think the stakes around parenting can feel so high. And again, when we mess up, when we fall short in some way, we really come down pretty hard on ourselves. And I think my hope is that I can offer parents some tools to better navigate those really challenging emotions, difficult moments that we all have with our kids. Again, knowing that it's okay to not always get it right at times. And so I hope that if anybody does pick up my book, that the book leaves them feeling empowered and inspired, supported and validated, never, ever, ever feeling bad about themselves. And I think if I had to guess, like some of my concerns about gentle parenting, some of the messaging that's out there, it can kind of come down pretty hard on parents and like make it seem like you're going to damage your kid or your relationship with your kid if you mess up. That's just, I really don't agree with that at all. Right. And so I hope that from our conversation, from the book, parents take a different message than that.
Perfect. I'm glad we got to that little nugget because I think it's really important.
Yeah.
How gentle parenting can be disseminated isn't always what it's really about. And so making that distinction. And I love that you are very explicit about this messaging around the imperfection of parenting. And that's part of the beauty of relationships. So where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about you?
Yeah, so they can go to my website, alissajerud.com. I'm also sometimes on Instagram, not all that often posting, but I am there. So my handle there is emotionsavvydoc.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today, Alissa.
Oh, thank you. It was so fun getting to chat with you, Emily.
All right, everyone. So you just finished listening to my conversation with Alissa Jerud, and I am so excited to be here with Debbie to have our co-host post about the discussion. So Debbie, I know you just listened to it. What came to mind for you?
Yes, hot off the presses. Just listened right before we started recording this. Well, first of all, I think that this whole idea of thinking at this level with our kids, like what's going on for them emotionally, how can we kind of coach them through their own emotions, what's happening for us emotionally, because parenting, it is not for the faint of heart. There's so many emotions and so many different aspects of parenting that can be hard and complicated. And so I think it's really helpful to think about this level, like what's happening emotionally. I think it can help us be more intentional. I love some of the strategies she gave. And I know that one of the things you alluded to, and I thought listeners might want to hear more about, was about gentle parenting and how you, Emily, have spoken publicly about some of the ways in which gentle parenting is being promoted out there in the world. But I thought that because you don't really get into it too much, maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons of gentle parenting in your mind, because I think to me it's a very interesting conversation that's happening in the parenting world right now. And you're kind of on the front lines talking about this.
Yes, I do have really strong opinions in some respects, but like I said in the interview, when I get really into what gentle parenting consists of, I do realize some overlap with my philosophy and strengths of it. So I do want to start with the whole idea of really trying to tune into our children's emotions is a very positive pendulum swing from what many of us grew up with in the 80s, which was not a lot of attention to the child's emotional life. I mean, the whole model of the family and parenting is that the child should obey the parent. So our parents were raised like that. Many of us were likely raised like that. And so this shift towards more of a focus on the emotional lives, I think is really positive because that is, of course, healthy for our relationships and for our children to grow up with that permission around really exploring their emotions. And I think there's been a swing where it's become all about our children's emotions. And with that has come a lack of limit setting and consequences and addressing behaviors. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you. I think that that sort of obedience model, I really am not a fan of that. Like that kids must comply and that our goal as parents is to get them to behave themselves. And so the type of parenting really encouraged kids to like squash their emotions. I mean, I think I work with adults all the time trying to correct that parenting style, like teach them what is an emotion? What do you do with emotion? And it's like, well, let's save our kids all the therapy money by teaching them that young. And so I think that's a positive shift. Yeah. And I agree with you. Like there's also a time and a place for consequences and setting limits. And I don't always hear that in the gentle parenting things that I follow.
So if you really read the gentle parenting literature, it does say that limits and consequences are part of their philosophy. But the problem is the way it has been disseminated by really popular, successful influencers does not focus on that. And it really conveys the message connection over consequences and really places so much emphasis on always tuning into the relationship with your child to the extent that the underlying message is that our relationships are fragile and we should not experience disruption, or we should avoid conflict and disruption with our kids as part of gentle parenting. And that's where I take issue because our relationships are much sturdier than that. And it places so much pressure on parents to be constantly responding to their child in ways that preserve the relationship, quote unquote. And if there is disruption, it feels like a failure. I see parents internalize that as a failure on their part. And that's where I see it being very unhealthy for parents. Then they end up, ironically, repressing their own emotions, which is the opposite of what Alissa Jerud is saying, that we need to be very aware of our emotions and coping with our emotions. But the way that it's often communicated in these, brief posts on Instagram and sound bites is much more like you need to be the perfect emotional robot, to parent. And just one example is a meme recently that I saw that was something like, your impatience becomes your child's anxiety. And I'm like, that's just
no pressure, parents, right? Like,
impatience is inherent to parenthood, right?
Of course.
And so then you're going to feel guilty. Like if you're impatient, you've caused a clinical disorder in your child. That's where I get reactive.
I mean, it's exhausting, and I'm so glad you're so attuned in your work to the parents' experience and how I think that there are so many messages out there that almost promote this perfectionistic parenting style. Like you can't ever mess this up or yell at your kids or be impatient. And I think that as a parent, like it's hard enough.
Yeah.
And so, the consequence of that is huge.
The pressure of that makes it more likely we will yell and blow up and be the parent we don't want to be, right? And if we just kind of relax our standards and take the pressure off every single interaction with our child, we're more likely to show up as the parent we want to be.
We've been podcasting for so long. It's interesting how sometimes things change over the course of time. And we did a really early episode on emotion coaching and children's emotions. And I stand by almost everything in that episode because we really talked about like, how do you help kids? How do you coach them through emotions instead of dismissing their emotions or sort of over-coddling their emotions? Yeah. But I made this comment about parents needing to regulate their own emotions because it's so terrible to yell at your kids or something. And I really regret saying that. I mean, this was years ago. We can link to it because, like I said, I stand by most of it. But I think I was a little too harsh. And I mean, come on. I yell at my kids sometimes, I'm like, I regret saying that.
We're also a science-based podcast. And my point about yelling, which is actually the most popular Psychology Today article I've written by far, is this article about the truth about parents who yell. And there is no research that the occasional yelling that most of us engage in with our kids is damaging. Like none. It's the extremes, right? And so we take the evidence from the very extremes, which is actually verbal abuse, emotional abuse, not yelling. It's the content, right?
Yeah.
But we then generalize that to we should never yell. And I do understand it feels bad to yell. And I'm not saying just we should yell all the time and that's fine. But we shouldn't beat ourselves up when we get to that point of kind of blowing our top a little bit.
Well, and I think that these moments actually provide an opportunity for repair, to talk about it and to apologize and do over, or to say, I was crashing out, the teenagers, that's what they say these days. It's like they crash out, I crash out, even fighting with your spouse or partner in front of your kids. It's like sometimes it gets a little ugly, but you're able to role model like, we can have moments like that and recover from them, repair, move forward.
It's good.
In my opinion, that's better than teaching them like, oh, you should never fight in front of your children because fighting is so bad and you must avoid conflict.
Because then what happens when they get in their first adult intimate relationship and there's a fight? They feel like it's over. Right? That they can't come back from that. And so I think, it's modeling and really giving permission to this range of emotional expression is a gift to our kids and actually brings us closer when we handle it well. So,
yes.
All right, Debbie, thank you so much for your thoughts. It was so fun talking to you. And I hope that listeners got a lot out of this, and feel free to email us and let us know what you thought. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.